Yeah. All right. So let's get started. Welcome to The Next Step. It's a new OAE program highlighting the journeys of recent alumni. My name is Chris Dole, and I'm here with my colleague and friend, Jeanette Remy, behind the scenes. Hey, Jeanette. And our next guest on The Next Step is Agenia Delouche. Agenia is a Hammond Scholar who graduated in 2017 and is currently pursuing a Ph.D. in school psychology at the University of Florida. She's a recipient of the McKnight Doctoral Fellowship and a Holmes Scholar. Her research interests include the exploration of how culturally and linguistically diverse students and their families engage in education and mental health experiences, especially early in a child's development. Agenia, it's a great pleasure to have you here and to have you on the other side of a student program. So you've spent many times, sitting in different classrooms or faculty apartments, listening to speakers, and now you are the speaker. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
So Agenia, start us off by telling us a bit about where you grew up and how you came to the University of Miami.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Florida through and through. I was actually born in Naples, Florida, but I grew up in Port St. Lucie, which is basically 2 hours north of Miami. My parents are from Haiti, so growing up in South Florida and having that Haitian upbringing was very, prominent just in my life and in my decision going to Miami, staying in Florida for sure. When I was applying to undergrad, I had lots of different places that I was looking, mostly around Florida. And I knew that I really wanted to go to UM, but I actually just didn't know if financially I would be able to do that. So I kind of was set that, UM would be great. If I got the Hammond, that would be great. But if not, I was actually ready to go to a different university. I had already talked to like a potential roommate, ready to go there. And then I got the phone call that I received the Hammond Scholarship. And I was like, sorry, other roommate, I'm going to UM. And the rest is history. And it was the best decision. And I'm so grateful that I got that call that day.
Awesome. We are too. What did you study at the University of Miami?
Yeah, so at UM, I studied psychology. I got my Bachelor of Arts in Psychology. And I also had 2 minors. So I started out with Human and Social Development. And then in my junior year, I added education just because I was like, why not, So I ended up doing all of those things, which are pretty cool because they're relevant to what I'm doing now.
So is that what you came in planning to do? Is what you graduated with the same plan that you had upon entering?
Definitely not in terms of the minors. I knew that I wanted to do psychology even before high school. I was like, I think I'm going to go into psychology. And I knew I had to choose a minor at the time that I went to UM, but I wasn't quite sure. I was like, what could allow me to just continue learning about working with people? So that's why I added Human and Social Development, which was like the perfect complement for psychology. And I didn't expect to add another minor at all. In my junior year, realized that I had taken a lot of credits in the beginning, so I had some extra room to take more classes. And I thought, what is something that I really love and that I'm passionate about? So I chose education. So I wasn't expecting that, but it was actually a really big reason as to like why I'm where I am now.
Great. How did you know that you wanted to be a psychology major as a first year student?
Yeah, I mean, probably back as early as middle school. Funny story, I was doing a science fair project, and the project that I chose was actually psychology related. It was about memory and working with other kids. And at the time, I didn't really know anything about what psychology was, but I ended up getting this award from the American Psychological Association. I was like, oh, what is this about? Let me look into this. And at the time, my basic conceptualization of psychology was you get to work with people, you get to be around people and get to listen and understand more about people. And to me, that was sounded great. So even throughout high school, I knew that I ultimately wanted to do that. My parents were always confused as to why I chose psychology. It's definitely not something that they thought I was going to do, but I felt pretty confident in that going into undergrad.
That's great. It's nice for me to hear that. I was a philosophy major in college, and really only because I enjoyed the topics. I didn't know what I would do with it in the future, and I had to answer a lot of questions about that. What are you going to do with a philosophy degree? And many people thought it was actually a psychology degree. A lot of people confused the two.
Yeah.
So how about outside the classroom? What were you involved in at UM?
So I was involved in quite a few things. I would say that my most prominent involvements, I was part of the Haitian Student Organization, and I had some leadership positions with that. I was the public relations chair at one point, and then in my senior year, I was the external vice president for Planet Creole. I also was involved with the Catholic Campus Ministry, had some leadership positions with that too, as secretary and outreach. I was involved with the Study Abroad Office as a global ambassador. I did a lot of research in the psychology department and also through the College of Education and Human Development. Did some volunteering in the community, was also in a few more academic organizations that were related to psychology. So I was in Psychi. I was involved with Omicron Delta Kappa towards the end of my time. So I definitely had a wide array of things that I was involved with in undergrad.
So speaking of study abroad, you mentioned studying abroad, which I know was a great experience for you, and I want to hear about it. But first, I want to hear about the decision to go. I remember very distinctly entering the Office of Academic Enhancement when it was located in Mahoney Pearson, and seeing you sitting in the lobby, and you were working intently on a PowerPoint presentation, but not for class. Tell us a little bit about who that PowerPoint was for and what it was about.
That is correct, yes. So one thing about me is I love traveling. I've always loved cultures, and I always knew that from the time I started undergrad, I was like, I'm going to find a way to study abroad. But the one barrier that I saw in that was trying to convince my parents. My parents were just very protective of me, and they couldn't imagine that I would even think or consider asking them if I could study abroad during undergrad. But I was like, you know what, I'm just going to like give it some time. Hopefully by the time I leave here, I would have had the chance to convince them in some way. So during my sophomore year, it was actually in conversations that I had with various people in the OAE, different advisors, and we were just brainstorming of, you know, how can I do this? Because this is something I really want to do. And someone told me that I should just like present it to them, make a PowerPoint and see what they think. And I was like, a PowerPoint? My parents are not going to go for that. But you know what? It's worth a shot. I really want to do this. Let's do this. So I made a very elaborate presentation about how I wanted to study abroad in London and what the university would be like and the different experiences that I could have and how this would help me in the future. And I really tried to tailor it towards the things that I knew that they would be concerned about. And I put this whole presentation together. Funnily enough, I went home recently after that, and I showed them this presentation. My parents had like stone faces the whole time. I couldn't catch their vibe at all. And I was on my way back to Miami. My parents still hadn't told me if they would allow me to study abroad. But in the car on the way back, my mom called me and she was like, yeah, you can do it. And I said, yes, the PowerPoint worked. And I never would have imagined that they would have worked. But that was the reason that I got to study abroad was that PowerPoint presentation I showed to my parents.
Awesome. So you went to London.
I did.
And how was that experience? Would you recommend it?
Oh, 100%. 10 out of 10. Would do it again a million times. I was at the University of Westminster in London during the fall semester of my junior year. And it was really cool for, so many reasons. I was able to take classes that were really of interest to me that I didn't have the opportunity to take at UM. I enrolled in a creative writing course. I enrolled in a crime and psychology course, a sociology course. So I got to get a breadth of experiences in terms of coursework. But I also just was able to learn from so many people in my university, but also in the city and the places that I traveled. It was really great that the same semester that I traveled, I had a couple of other friends who were studying abroad as well. One of my best friends, also a Hammond Scholar alum, was in Paris at the time. So we actually got to travel together throughout that semester. And it was just an amazing experience. I never thought that I would have as much fun as I did, but also learn so much about myself as I did in that semester. And that's why I came back and I became a global ambassador. And I was like, everyone needs to study abroad. It's the best thing that you could do.
Mm-hmm. So many times with experiences that are really overwhelmingly positive, we tend to gloss over maybe difficult times during those experiences. Was there any point during study abroad that you had apprehensions, reservations, maybe you were wondering if you regretted going, anything like that?
I mean, definitely on the probably, what was it, 8 to 10 hours that I was on the flight heading over, it was interesting. I actually flew on the day of my 21st birthday and I couldn't sleep. It was an overnight flight and I didn't get any sleep at all because the whole time I was on my way there, I was like, I'm really about to be in a different country, away from my family, away from everything I've ever known. What am I doing? And I was thinking like, wow, do I really want to do this? Am I ready for this? To be honest, that was really the only point of apprehension or doubt that I had.
Mm.
Once I got there, it was it was just amazing. I think the reason for that is that I knew that this was going to be a once in a lifetime experience, and I did so many things that I don't know if I would have typically done had I been home. Just the way that I was free to be adventurous and to travel and to learn from people and to talk to strangers and yeah, so I definitely didn't have so many doubts once I was there and immersed in the process.
But I wanted to shift back to, so you were a social sciences major, and I have this conversation a lot as an advisor with students who are struggling to figure out, how do I connect what I'm studying to an eventual career path? So
Mhm.
what did that look like for you? How did you decide you were going to go to graduate school? And I guess we could talk also about the difference, how did you decide to pursue a PhD rather than a master's degree? But first, talk about that time when you knew what you wanted to study, but you weren't necessarily sure what you would do with that as a career in the future.
Right. So definitely, as I mentioned, I knew I wanted to do something in psychology, but psychology is a very broad field. And I feel like I heard many times like, you have to go to grad school, you have to go to grad school. And I think I internalized that, like, yeah, I definitely want to go to grad school. What for? I'm not exactly sure. And I remember meeting with my advisor in psychology, and he would ask, so what are you thinking? And one semester it was clinical psychology, and the next semester it was counseling psychology, and the next semester I was like, do I even want to do psychology anymore? I don't know. um, and I actually, in a really beautiful way, stumbled upon the field that I'm in right now, which is school psychology. When I came back from study abroad is when I added that education minor. And in the first class I took for that minor, in the first day of class, my professor said, also, I'm a licensed school psychologist. And I said, school psychologist, what is that? I've never heard of that. That sounds interesting. Um, and kind of connecting that to other experiences that I had in undergrad, I realized not at the time, but kind of later on, that all of the things that I involved myself with were related to psychology and education in some way, whether it was the research that I was involved with in the psychology department, all had some element of working with students, education, being in schools. The volunteering that I did in the community had this element of working with children, working with students. So I never knew that there was this field that could combine all of those things that I was really passionate about into school psychology, and there it was. So I definitely think a lot of my development and figuring out what I wanted to do kind of came spontaneously. It wasn't something that I planned for. It was just a matter of really tapping into things that I enjoyed. I knew that I enjoyed working with students. I knew that I enjoyed all of the experiences that I was having. So to find something that would allow me to continue cultivating that after undergrad, it was pretty much a no-brainer for sure.
And then how about the decision for a master's versus a PhD?
Yeah, so with school psychology, so there's the PhD route, and then there's the equivalent of a master's for school psychology, which is the education specialist degree. And that's really the minimum degree that you can have to work as a school psychologist. And I remember when I was applying to programs, there were some programs that only had the PhD track, and then there were other programs that had the master's or specialist level and the PhD track. And I actually remember feeling like, I'm not going to get into a PhD program out of undergrad. Like I wasn't feeling super confident for whatever reason. And I actually owe a lot of this to you, Chris. I remember specifically sitting in your office and we were talking about that. And you kind of actually prompted me and questioned, so what are you thinking about? Like, which track are you considering? And the only rationale that I had for not going for PhD was just because I didn't feel like that they would see me as someone who was ready and able to be able to do that. And I remember you telling me, oh, you got this, like 100% go for it. so that by the time I went to interviews, they were asking me, so what are you considering for your track? And I was confident in saying, yeah, I think I'm going to go for the PhD, knowing that I wanted a plethora of options open to me after I graduate from graduate school. It made sense for me to go down that route. So thank you. I definitely owe a lot of that decision to just mentorship, that I came to understand that it wasn't something that seemed so far out of reach like I thought it was.
Well, you're very welcome. It was very easy to see how well you would do in any interview or any program that you entered. So no problem there. Let me ask you this question, though, because when this conversation comes up now for me, a lot of times students will tell me, you know, I've been in school since I'm, you know, whatever, 5 years old. And so they kind of see they're getting close to finishing undergrad. And the idea of grad schools is definitely a possibility. A master's that's only a year or 2 years, depending on the program, seems much more palatable than the 4 or 5, maybe 6, sometimes longer years of a PhD. And I often say, you know, I'm older, so it's easy for me to look back and say, look, if you go straight into a PhD program and it's 5 years, you're something like 27 years old when you're done. That's very, very young. You have a lot of time ahead of you. But on the other side of that, it's hard to see that. So how do you, being in the middle of this, being in your 4th year of graduate school, how do you evaluate that mentality?
Yeah, it's so interesting that you brought that up, because I definitely agree with what you're saying. I think at the time, when I was first starting, I was like, did I really just make a decision to be in school for at least another 5 years? And I definitely did question that. But right now I'm in my 4th year, and I honestly feel like it just started. So I think it's one of those things that always, when you're in the midst of something, especially when you're doing something that you really love, and that can be really difficult and really hard, but you know that it's really fulfilling to you. You don't really think about, wow, I really have this much more time to go. I wouldn't have imagined that I would be in my 4th year and feeling like, you know, time has really just flown by. So I definitely agree with that sentiment that you're saying. I think it's easier once you're in it to realize that it's not so daunting. But I can understand why beforehand it feels like forever, because I felt that as well.
Oh, sure. I remember being in high school and thinking how long of a road medical doctors had ahead of them, you know, not just 4 years of college beyond high school, but, you know, all the medical training. But yeah, time does funny things the older you get, for sure.
It does, it does.
So let me ask you, what is the next step for you? What will you do once you become a doctor?
Yeah, so that is also a question that I've gone back and forth with that many times. But again, as I was mentioning, in undergrad, I really was trying to recognize, what is it that I like? What am I passionate about? And I've asked myself that question a lot during grad school, like, where do I fit? And there's a few things in my experience that I think have helped with me being able to answer that question. One is that I've been super fortunate that I've been able to teach. And I've taught for the last 7 semesters now, which is crazy to think. Yeah, so I taught undergrad students this semester. I'm teaching at the undergrad and grad levels. And it's honestly like the highlight of my day every day that I work with students. So I realized that a big part of what I wanted to do was work with students who were learning just like I am learning about, you know, coming into the field. I also am engaging in research and realizing that because there's such a huge research to practice gap, where we're studying so many things, but we're not always necessarily cognizant of how that is reflected in real life, people's experiences in real communities, and being able to do research that is meaningful in that way. You know, I think all of those things taken together, being in academia, working in a university setting where I can teach and where I can work with communities of people and where I can do meaningful research, to me, it makes the most sense. And I think it's where I'd be able to engage in all of those opportunities for sure.
Great. That's awesome. Listen, we have a small segment here before we segue to, I know we have a couple questions in the queue, so we're going to turn it over to the students in a moment. But first, I want them to get to know you a little bit better. So we have a small segment here called Quick Hits.
Okay.
You don't have to go on and on, just, you know, whatever your first response is or first thought is to some of these questions so we can get to know you. So, Agenia, what is your favorite movie?
Favorite movie? Super cliche, but Titanic, 100%. I've seen that like more times than I can count, and I'm such a sap. So 100% that one.
Great. How about favorite cuisine?
Haitian food all the way, specifically made by my mother. But if it's not made, if it's made by anyone else, that's also okay. Love Haitian food.
Okay, unplanned quick hit question. What's your favorite Haitian restaurant in Miami?
Ooh, that's really good. That's a great question. I mean, there are so many good ones. There was one that I really liked that is not there anymore called Tap Tap. That one was a classic. But there are actually a lot of really good spots in Little Haiti that I would hit up. Honestly, all of them are good.
I've been to Tap Tap before. I didn't know that it was
Mhm.
closed, so I'm sad to hear
Yeah.
that. What is the favorite trip you've taken?
Favorite trip. Ooh, that is very difficult. I talked about study abroad, so I'll cheat a little bit and not mention that so that I can choose another place. Probably last summer, my friend and I were presenting at a conference in Switzerland, and we were like, we're here, we might as well take advantage of this. So we took one backpack with us, and we basically backpacked around 10 cities across 8 different countries in 16 days.
Good for
So,
you,
yeah,
Agenia. You're living your best life for sure.
trying to.
What is the best decade for music? 80s, 90s, thousands, or 2010s?
That's so hard. I actually listen to music from all of those decades, but I would say the thousands just because it's connected emotionally, the memory of, my childhood and growing up. So I would say the thousands.
A little more personal. What are you most proud of?
Ooh, yeah. I would say just the where I am education wise, being a first generation college graduate, being as far as I know, the first person in my family to be in this PhD journey and to say that I'm going to have my PhD. I mean, it just feels like I've really fulfilled this desire that my parents had when they moved to this country for providing education opportunities for their kids. So I'm really proud of that in myself.
And is there anything you would do differently if you had the chance?
Hmm. Maybe get some more traveling in pre-COVID. But besides that, I don't know if I would do anything differently. I've had a lot of challenges, had a lot of struggles, but I don't really regret anything. So
Great. And what did being a Hammond Scholar mean to you?
mm, everything. I mean, so much of my just the most important parts of my life were the 4 years that I had at UM, and I wouldn't have been there without being a Hammond Scholar. The word that comes to my mind is family. I mean, to this day, I still talk to my Hammond family quite a bit and keep up with them. So family for sure.
All right, let's turn it over to the students. Let's see who we have. Students, if you could, once we turn your camera on, if you could introduce yourself, name, year, and your major, and then you can go ahead with your question. Jorge.
First of all, thank you for doing this panel. I appreciate Anjani coming in and talking to us about her experience. I'm a Hammond Scholar. I'm a senior, double majoring in computer science and environmental science. And I guess my biggest question is, did you go to grad school directly after undergrad? And if so, how did you handle applying and figuring out your next step while trying to finish your undergrad? And if not, how did you reconnect with the people that you needed to in order to get to the next step?
That's a really great question. Thank you for asking it and thank you for being here. I actually went to grad school straight out of undergrad. And the only way that I was able to do it was through keeping in constant contact with the people who were able to just mentor me throughout my senior year, especially. So keeping in contact with Chris, individuals in the OAE to kind of help me and guide me through that process. I was really connected with the professors that I asked for letters of recommendation, particularly the one who studied school psychology. I made sure that I was always in her office hours, always emailing her, always contacting her, because she was someone who, to this day, actually still helps and mentors me within the field. So I think a big part of the reason that I was able to, go into grad school right out of undergrad is just because I was trying my best to maintain connections that would help support me in that. So I definitely think it's possible, kind of like what I was mentioning before. I was like, is there any way I'm really going to get into a PhD program out of undergrad? But it definitely is possible, but it's made so much easier when you have support and when you are intentionally seeking that out.
Thank you, Jorge. I think we have another question from Brianna. Hey, Brianna, how you doing? You could turn your camera on and go ahead with your introduction.
Hi. I also wanted to say thank you. Your talk was really helpful for me. And my question was, how did you decide whether to pursue a BA in psychology or a BS?
Thank you. That's also a very good question. So at the time, I actually went back and forth, and there was a part of me that said, maybe I'll do the BS, maybe I'll do the BA. But I thought about what my strengths were, and my strengths were not in some of the classes that I knew I needed to pursue the BS, specifically thinking about like the advanced stats courses. I knew I'd have to get into those, but I knew that I would feel more confident in the classes that I was able to take through the BA. So for me, it just took a matter of looking at both tracks and seeing what classes I had to take for those, and then deciding, okay, what is going to be the most beneficial to me, and would it really make a big difference depending on what I want to do after undergrad. So in the degree that I was going into in school psychology, we have people who do the BA and people who do the BS, and it doesn't necessarily pose that much of a difference. But I would say that if you are aiming to go into a post-grad degree that is more related to science, more in STEM, but you're using psychology as the bridge to that, then the BS might be more beneficial. So I really think it also is a matter of not only looking at the coursework, but thinking about where you want to go and what classes might help you in that.
Thank you, Brianna. I had a couple questions myself. You know, we're in week 6, I think, right now of our semester. And so I have a lot of conversations with students about things like managing time and managing stress. Do you remember your first year in college? And do you have any advice for students about managing time and managing stress?
Yeah, I definitely remember my first year in college for sure. And at the time, if you asked me about my first year in college, I would have said that, you know, it's very fun, but I'm very stressed and very overwhelmed. But looking back, if you ask me what I remember about my first year in college, I just remember the friendships that I made, the people that kind of helped me in the midst of that stress. And I found that actually to be a lot more important than just diving into that stress and not making time to like take care of myself, to cultivate solid friendships, solid relationships with people. So I think that was a huge part of stress management. If I wasn't able to say, okay, I have all this work to do, but I can get through this with someone else, I don't know how I would have made it. You know, I had lots of times where I was late in Richter Library studying, but I had friends with me the whole time, right? So I think that was, the key to how I was able to manage stress. Also, just some of the more like logistical things. I'm very much an organizer, so put everything in my calendar. I have a lot of to-do lists. I use Post-its everywhere. So I'm always, making sure that I'm on top of things so that I don't actually dig a hole for myself and get more stressed than I need to be.
You know, you mentioned friends. That's sort of the other big challenge of transitioning to college is how do you build a social group? How do you get involved? And when you were speaking earlier, you mentioned a lot of things that you were engaged in college, but how did that happen? Did it happen all your first year, or how did you build such a resume of involvements on campus?
Definitely. So I would say, I mentioned a lot earlier, but in my first year, I was involved in maybe twice as much as what I mentioned. So in my first year, it was really a matter of kind of doing everything. I was like, here we go. I don't know anyone here. How can I get involved? How can I meet people? So you name it, I was doing it. If there was an event, I was there. I was really just trying to immerse myself. But I think what really stuck with me is once I kind of found where is my niche, where am I most comfortable, where am I finding people that I really connect with? Not to say that I dropped the other things, but I just invested more of my time in some of the areas that I mentioned earlier. So I met a lot of people just by diving in and doing everything, but I maintained a lot of friendships by really focusing my time in some of those organizations, some of those ways that as much as I was gaining other skills like leadership skills, I was gaining a lot of friendships along the way as well. So really investing time in that and being intentional with it, because again, it's really easy to just focus your whole entire time on studying and doing your work. But when I think back to undergrad, I think of my friends and I think of all the involvements that led me to meet the friends that I still have to this day. So.
I'm sitting here thinking, I have one more question for you, especially as a, psychologist in training. So
Mm.
we have this very odd dynamic right now where we're in front of our computers almost all of the time, and a lot of social interaction takes place this way, and our courses are being conducted this way more often than not. As a psychologist and as a recent undergraduate student, current graduate student, what advice do you have for students about managing this period of time in our history with COVID and quarantine?
Yeah, definitely. So as much as I said that it was important to not um, only be stressed, to have all of those friendships, to have those social relationships, as much as a paradox as it seems, like we're away from everyone, it's so much more important now to really dive into social relationships and to cultivate that. I remember kind of at the start of this time that we're in, it almost felt like, okay, I'm home all the time. I'm working from home. I'm not around people. I have no choice but to reach out to people all the time and to really be more intentional than I was before. And through that, it's actually been really, really beautiful. I've been able to, keep up with people and catch up with people that I honestly don't know if I would have had we not been in times of COVID, just because I realize that it's so much more important now to be intentional about having those relationships. So it's definitely possible. I know that in my graduate program, we're doing things to try to engage students as much as possible. Virtual movie nights, doing a lot of things through Zoom. Zoom is our new best friend, but honestly taking advantage of it, because at the end of the day, there's a world in which we say, this is really difficult and I'm just gonna, not engage. But as far as we know, we don't know how long we'll kind of be in this time period. So just diving in more than you would have before is honestly my biggest advice, and is what I've been trying to do.
I want to thank Agenia for her time. Agenia, it's a joy to see you again. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. I'm
Likewise.
very proud of you. You're doing great things and you're almost done. And it's exciting for me to hear that you're teaching and you've been in the classroom teaching for 7 semesters now. So you really dove right in. But I imagine you're a wonderful professor. And again, I'm proud of you. And I'm very happy we're able to connect and revisit some recent years.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy that I was able to do this. You know that I'm always super grateful for my Hammond family. So thank you for having me.
Hey, let's throw up. I know you're at UF, and I don't want to see any gator chomps, please. But let's throw up the U for good old time's sake.
Oh, 100%. I do it every day.
Thanks, Agenia. See
For
you later.
sure. Bye.